I wore a mask all the way to Brazil and all the way back.
Yeah. I'm surprised you got on a plane, honestly.
Well, I had to go teach.
Oh.
But I was the only guy in the Dallas. I was the only guy. Two Chinese guys were the only ones. I was the only other person that had a mask on.
Oh, really?
And in the plane, I was the only person with a mask on in the plane.
Well, I would rather look silly than get my kids sick. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'd rather look silly than get sick.
Yeah. The good news is that apparently it hasn't, not a single case of a child under the age of 10 has passed away, immunosuppressed or not. So that's...
Kids have really good immune systems.
Yeah.
Even immunosuppressed, they got those young, hormones going.
Yep.
I envy, 3 and 4 year olds. One of the reasons you get so sick when you have little kids is the viruses and bacteria in kids have to be super robust to defeat the kids' immune systems.
That's right.
So by the time it makes it to us, we're dealing with, something that has mutated in the stronger direction.
Well, their immune systems need a little extra teeth because they're such, germ factories. Well, Keith, here we are again for another episode of Wit and Wisdom.
Another episode, oh boy.
Yeah, man. So today we're going to be talking about one of our actually favorite subjects, something that we've talked about a number of times in the past, but we keep sort of unfolding it in new and novel ways. Mm-hmm. And that is defensive states, and particularly how defensive states tend to get in the way of genuine self-knowledge and self-discovery.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a big one, Keith, and it's an important one because, it seems to me that when we're talking about self-discovery and how defensive states sort of prevent us from realizing those parts of ourselves, we're really talking about sort of the lowest parts of our being and some of the highest parts of our being. Yeah,
that's right. I listened to an integral psychotherapist, Chad Bennett, talking with Jeff, and really enjoyed it. And the perspectives that he took on working with people were looking at shadow issues that require insight, looking at trauma issues that would require physiological adjustments, and looking at attachment issues that require interpersonal adjustments. And I think those are good perspectives. I think it's good. You always got to focus on something in a psychotherapy session. It's very similar to a guy, Terry Rio, worked with couples. He says, I join with the truth. That's kind of focusing in on shadow. I do the trauma work, and then I work on teaching people how to love. I think that's true. But one thing about all that stuff is that they're all happening simultaneously. It's all relational all the time. And a very central feature of human contact and human society is when we feel safe with each other and socially engaged, we tend to have good reality testing. We tend to be co-constructing an intersubjectivity that's working for both of us. Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, the magic of the lower left quadrant and the lower right quadrant. It's the source of so much growth and pleasure and love and everything. We all crave it. We're all addicted to each other and so on. When we experience other people as unsafe, we have evolutionary forces that have been developed over millions of years of evolution, where humans are the biggest threat to humans, where we start protecting ourselves. And that's largely through defensive states. And what a defensive state does is it perceives another person as unsafe, and then it creates a state to protect us. And that state has amplified or numbed emotions designed to activate us. It has a distorted perspective to explain to us why this person is unsafe. It cuts off contact with the other person. It disconnects with a lack of self-awareness, a lack of empathy to the other person. And then generally there's an impulse to fight, to flee, or to collapse. All three of which are socially adaptable. And you see them all in primate communities, everywhere. This is how we've been programmed, and with mammals in general. Of course, humans take all the drives and turn them into art. And so in human beings, those defenses take a bazillion different forms. And mostly when I've talked about defenses, I've talked about how I'm trying to protect myself from you in a defensive state.
I am very threatening.
I know, you got to dial that back, Corey. Let people know that you're a safe person, okay? That happens to me when I go to doctors. Like, I'm kind of I radiate a kind of dangerous energy. So if a doctor is super self-confident, they like me. If a doctor has some kind of stuff, they start, dropping things and fumbling around and stuff. The reasons I have braces is, I went from a bad dentist to a good dentist, and the good dentist was not intimidated by me one little bit, and told me that my teeth would wear out 40% less if I got braces, and go do it. And I went, okay. That was very credible.
Just real quick, I think our audience is maybe a little bit confused because suddenly Keith Witt has braces and Ken Wilber's wearing a wig. What's going on in Integral Land?
Well, the reason I got braces is my dentist said I would have 40% less wear on my teeth. And I went, okay, I'm willing to endure discomfort for 18 months to protect my teeth. I guess, if you hire an expert, you should do what the expert said mostly. Not to say I didn't have a lot of defensive impulses that came out of that. So we generate the defenses. We think we're defending with another person, and mostly we are, but really we're defending from knowledge about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That in a defensive state, that lack of self-awareness, self-reflection, there's parts of me I don't want to be aware of. This is destructive shadow in me. And this is a huge, big deal. And it explains an awful lot. Most everybody who's listening to this and who accesses this or any of the other offerings that Integral Life has, most everybody's a seeker of some sort. Everybody's listening today. We're all seekers, right? Okay, so how come we're not like growing at a phenomenal speed all the time? Certainly we have this miracle of human consciousness. Brains self-organize, the fields of the brain self-organize right to the edge of chaos. And at a very young age, human brains are ridiculously, and human consciousness is ridiculously sophisticated, though the brains are immature and incapable of certain kinds of thinking, which is, part of what it figures into what we're going to talk about. How come we're not growing all the time? We have a resistance to change.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're born with different temperamental characteristics. One of them is novelty seeking. One of them is self-transcendence. Okay, that takes us into wanting change, being seekers, but there also is harm avoidance. Okay. We're also born with varying levels of cooperation and persistence and so on, but we're also born frightened of change. And part of their fear of change is our fear of death. As we change our consciousness, we're turning into different people. That famous quote that we walk forward on the developmental line vertically on the tombstones of the selves that we used to be.
Mm.
Well, we resist that. And also, when we learned defenses, starting around, we learn how to dissociate or not dissociate from birth onward, and actually from the third trimester onward. But interactionally, relationally, in the lower left, when mammals reach the age of toddlers, and for humans that's around 11 or 12 months, if you remember from your daughter, kids start feeling separate and enough from mom and dad that they know they have to seek out mom and dad to be soothed. Also, they start getting into things. They're walking around and they're capable of experiencing shame emotions. If you disapprove of an 8-month-old, they don't blush. Disapprove of a 12-month-old, they blush.
Mm.
Their muscles get weak around their neck. They freeze. They look down. They feel that unpleasant shame emotion. And later on, they're 4 or 5, they can feel disgust. And disgust it gets harnessed into the shame emotions, into self-disgust and so on. And so this is how we have social learning. This is how we learn how to get along with each other. But also when someone disapproves of me for, running into the street or whatever, and I get ashamed and I do social learning. My nervous system does not like that. And partly because until you're around 5 or 6, you're pre-operational or sensory motor in terms of your thinking, meaning your brain can only think in certain kinds of primitive ways. And mostly this is black and white. So to a little kid, if I did something bad, I am bad. If I did something I'm ashamed of, then I am shame. I am a worthless person. So the defenses have been programmed in when we were programming in black and white forms like that.
Mhm.
And the nervous system defends against that. We do not want to feel bad. We do not want to feel ugly. We do not want to feel immoral. We want to feel virtuous. We want to feel beautiful. We want to feel strong. We don't want to feel weak. And so the idea that I can feel ugly or immoral or weak, and then I can make an adjustment and grow from it and become a more strong and beautiful and virtuous person, brains are not capable of thinking that until at least early adolescence. And by then you've had an eternity in neurological time to strengthen these defensive states where we want to avoid those experiences. We want to avoid insight into that. We want to avoid seeing those things. And how do we avoid them? We avoid them with the defenses. It's not me, that's denial. You did it. There's projection.
Mhm.
I'm going to go kick my dog because, my dog was bad. There's projection and, scapegoating. And I go on and on. And then there's projective identification, probably the nastiest defense, which is I take the dark part of me, the violent part or the icky part of the selfish part, project it onto you, and then maintain my sense of self by attacking that imagined place in you. And this is a characteristic defense of some personality disorders, specifically borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, paranoid personality disorder. Anyway, and we all do it to some extent. And so we don't want to see these unattractive or parts of ourselves. We resist that awareness. And so the defenses are designed to hide us from ourselves. Now, if we do hide from ourselves, what we're doing is we're creating a blocked, rigid, stuck place in our unconscious. And when you have a rigid, stuck place, it doesn't mature. It doesn't evolve. In complexity theory, you have a complex system. It's linked, differentiated parts, arranged hierarchically, energized from the outside, capable of chaotic behavior, but doesn't get lost in chaos. We're basically talking about two humans together, a human consciousness. These are prime examples of complex systems. But what if there's a part of me that refuses to change? It's not my fault, okay? Never my fault. People who are unable to apologize, for instance. Okay, that rigidity now can't evolve. And now I have to organize my personality to somehow make sense of the fact that there's a part of me that can't evolve. Or say I let myself be mean to people under certain circumstances. If they deserve it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right? Okay, well, that has a certain kind of feeling to it. It's indulging the desire to attack somebody I'm mad at, which is indulging violence as a horrible addiction that people get into. It strengthens that, but I have to avoid seeing it because that's unattractive. To tell somebody, you're trying to get relief by tormenting the person you're mad at, that's not very flattering to a person. They want to go, no, I'm not doing that. I'm just telling them what I really think, or they really deserve it, or something other than I'm indulging my sadistic side that wants to torment somebody that I'm pissed at. And I'm getting, relief from it. I remember one guy, I was working with this woman and she brought her husband in and he would bully the family, the two kids and her. And I told him, I said, when you get mad, you bully them. He never came back. The idea of that his behavior constituted bullying was intolerable to him. And in retrospect, it was probably a mistake for me to use that language with him at that stage of the work. I should have been a lot more gentle because that just wounded his narcissism way too much. And so, he says, I'm going to, screw this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not going to go back. And he went home and kept bullying his wife and kids. I don't know if they're still together or not, but it's a good example. Couldn't see it.
It's tough when that defensive state itself feels so righteous.
You feel self-righteous. And also human communication is always complementary. So say you and I are in a relationship and you do something that threatens me. And I go, wait a minute, and notice how my face changes, the prosody of my voice changes. I get a little dismissive, maybe a little contemptuous. You feel that and you can't help yourself. You enter a complementary defensive state. Keith's not safe. Okay, now you're coming back. You're not being a very nice guy, Keith. You're being kind of a dick. Okay. Well, I get that. That makes you more unsafe. Now, both of us want to get back to loving each other. But we instinctively, the way we want to get back to that is by attacking each other and denying our own problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so this happens all the time in relationships. As the more distressed people are, the more cruel they are to each other, the more frustrated that they're getting, because they can feel the disconnection and they blame the disconnection on the other person. And they keep on trying to get the other person to change so that they can be connected again, not realizing that their behavior is keeping the disconnection going. And the more upset people get, the more rigid they get, the less able they are to receive from another person. Why? Receiving is a vulnerable act. This happened to me 3 or 4 times this last week, and it happens a fair amount. I'm working with a couple. Okay, so the guy's been a jerk in some way. All right. So she says, yuck, and she's cut off. She's in a defensive state. So I get him to stop being a jerk, get him to be kind of a good guy. He's basically a good guy, but he was in a jerk moment. Okay, so now he's offering her whatever she wanted, attention, love, validation. And I ask her, do you feel any pleasure from this? And she'll go, no. And I'll go, so that lack of pleasure is you defended. You're in a state now where you only are receiving negatives from him, not receiving positives. And so what that'll do, if you guys were home, is he would start getting to be a dick again. The guy's sitting there, and so you need to be able to feel that positive intent, let a little pleasure in. So, we work with, so she does. And when she lets the pleasure in, she softens. As she softens, he softens. And there's a moment of love. They're out of the defensive state. They're socially engaged. Oh God, this is what we were wanting. We were wanting to be connected and warm. Okay? It was like that. That's very, very hard to do, because if you're in a defensive state, my nervous system really wants a complementary defensive state. It requires a tremendous amount of effort on my part to stay, wait a minute, I understand you're upset with me, but what did I do wrong? I mean, I'm really trying to figure it out. What can I do to help us get back together? Now that's a superior response. Why? Instead of you and me going after each other, it's like, I'm trying to make an alliance with you so that you and I can deal with the problem collaboratively. Instead of fight or collapsing my way out of the problem, I'm trying to love my way out of this issue with you. Instead of not being available to warm contact with you, I'm offering you warm contact and just waiting. As soon as you start getting warm with me, I go, thanks. Instead of avoiding the negative part of what I'm saying, I'm going, so what am I doing that's hurting your feelings? Well, that tone, Keith, my wife does this a lot. She says, it was your tone. I go, I'm sorry. I guess that was a little critical or a little stressed. And I know you're sensitive to that. And then she relaxes, because I noticed it and I'm trying to work on it. And I've been working on our whole marriage 46 years. I guess I will the rest of my life. And so my effort then is received by her, and I feel her relaxing. Now I'm relaxing. Now we're back into social engagement. Very, very hard to do that. But that's what we're all wanting. And what we're avoiding is that self-knowledge. And in the integration of defenses line, which I think is a central line, basically, that affects all of the lines to some extent. As you progress on that line, you get more and more interested in your interior experiences, and what state you're evidencing, whether it's a positive or a negative one. So you get kind of interested when you get anxious, or you get sad, or get depressed, or get hostile. Wow, wonder why I'm getting so hostile. Similarly, on that line, you get interested when you're being effective. You go, wow, I'm really kicking it right now. Because remember, we don't just defend against dark stuff. A lot of people, when they were trying to celebrate who they were when they were kids, particularly in my generation back in the 50s, if you said, God, I did that well, somebody would go, don't feel so good about yourself. I actually had a friend of mine, about a few years younger than me, say that to my son. When my son was 8, he says, boy, I'm really good at that. And then he looked at him reflexively and said, don't speak so well of yourself. He disapproved of him, because that's how we were taught. And so people will not see their own strengths. They won't see their own beauty. And one of the most common problems that people have is they're defending against their own beauty, their own sense of their own love, their own beautiful, good, and true aspects, that they've learned to block the awareness of that to protect themselves, for fear if they're aware of it, somehow I'm going to get injured, because they did it historically. That's how they learned that.
Keith, does that have anything to do? A few months ago, we did an episode about creating a coherent life story
Mhm.
and how important those narratives are whenever these kinds of defensive states kind of emerge for us.
Mhm.
Is that sort of a piece of this here? Because as you were talking earlier about a couple who maybe a woman doesn't trust to allow pleasure in when she's receiving sort
Mhm.
of positive vibes from her partner. Well, part of that might be because she has this life story that says, well, over the last 5 years, every time we've been through this circuit, here's how it ends up. And so I'm kind of proactively defending myself a little bit more. And it seems like that resistance might be a little bit more difficult to help someone disarm just because it's based on 5, 10, who knows how many years of experience. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And the guy has a story. That's just how I am.
Mm,
I get irritated. That's just how I am,
mm,
which is a horrible thing to say to somebody in conflict. Now, and also I think there's field effects. Jeff and I just had a Shrinking Pundit where we talked about Rupert Sheldrake's book, The
mm,
Science Delusion. And we create morphic fields that have attractor states. What's an attractor state? Attractor state is where a couple is drawn to go, or a person is drawn to go under certain circumstances. So if there's a circumstance of a little bit of pressure on me and there's an attractor state of going to a defended place, I'm going to find my way to that defended place. It's like a gravity well. And if I can't get there one way, I'll get there another way. If I have an attractor state with you going into conflict when I'm feeling uncomfortable or tired or challenged, I'm going to find a way to get there. Sheldrake calls those channels to that attractor state, to that place,
mhm,
Sharrows, because the guy named Waddington who first talked about epigenetic principles being applied to morphic fields, he called them morphogenetic fields and called them Sharrows. And so I think we create fields. And so individually, if I have an attractor state of, say I make a mistake going, Keith, you idiot. Okay, I practice that. Now I'm creating a field of, Keith, you're an idiot when you're not perfect. And I'm strengthening it because we resonate with ourselves probably more than anybody else. So I think there's also field effects.
yeah.
And so part of what psychotherapy is you want to create an alternative field. You want to do that with everything. You want to do that in relationships. You want to do that with trauma. You want to do that with shadow, stuff that you're not aware of. Why? You want to be dialed into the present moment. And dialed in is, I'm aware of who I am in the present moment. And most of us, because we have the miracle of self-awareness, if we're fully aware of who we are in the present moment, we're going, well, I'm doing pretty well. I'm a human being with human being superpowers. I'm connected in relationships that are important to me. I'm making my way through the world, demonstrating an awful lot of capacities. I have many choices that I can make that can make me a healthier, more successful person and a more loving person. Wow. Being fully in the present moment is a pretty good thing. And I have strengths and weaknesses, and I can work on my weaknesses and I can celebrate my strengths. And so that's being dialed in. Then if I find an area of me that is screwed up or is ugly or is immoral or, whatever, selfish, I go, wow, there's my selfish self or my mean self or my sadistic self or my angry self. Wonder why that showed up. As you progress in the integration of defenses line, you become more interested in that stuff when it comes up. That interest pulls you into an engagement with it. Similarly, if your partner gets distressed or somebody else, you get more interested in what's going on and you want to offer help rather than defense. It's very disarming interpersonally in a good way for someone to say, God, you seem to be in a bad mood. Is there anything I can do to help?
Mm,
You seem kind of sensitive, you kind of are taking an issue with what I mean. Is there something going on? Is there something I can do to help? Because if someone is putting out those kinds of signals, they're really expecting on a particular level to get a complementary hostile response. It's disarming to get somebody to go, you seem to be in pain. Can I help? Yeah, and this is one of the reasons I think psychotherapy helps so much. That therapists are trained to respond in that way with interest to whatever's going on, and with a lot of commitment to being fully present in the present moment to strengths, weaknesses, goals, and dreams. And what you were describing, this autobiographical narrative, mostly that's the switching places for those who are in the right hemisphere. And after reading Sheldrake's books, I don't know if the memories are there at all. Sheldrake thinks that memories are held in fields, and that we have switching centers in our brain that access them through resonance. And the reason why he says that is he said that we've never been able to find specific memories in brains. We've been able to find areas of sensation and of processing, emotion and reaction, language, but specific memories that really the memory researchers throw up their hands, ultimately the experts, and go, we really can't explain where they are.
Right.
And Sheldrake's, well, morphic resonance with ourselves is probably as good an explanation as any. Now, that being said, what if we have attractor states for feeling either like we can never be wrong or feeling like we can never be beautiful or never be strong? If we have those attractor states, we'll find a way to get them until we create new attractor states with our human superpowers of focused intent and action in service of principle. And driven by resolve, we all have some kind of persistence that we've gotten genetically from our ancestors. Some of us have more, some have less, but we all have some. And so organizing ourselves towards, what am I avoiding in me? Strengths or weaknesses? If there is a disruption going on that I'm participating in, what am I avoiding in me? Particularly, it's easy these days for me if I'm bummed at another person. If I'm bummed at another person, I'm going, okay, Keith, what's going on with you around that? And there'll be something. There'll be something I'm avoiding. And what I've learned to do with that is talk to people about it. And until it has the feeling of compassionate understanding. And when I can feel compassionate understanding for me and another person, I start trusting what I think and want to do again. But if I'm not feeling that, I'm not really trusting that I'm dialed in to the present moment. And I think in terms of development on the integration of defenses line, that's a milestone. It's a milestone to get less certain of what you feel and think when you're in a aroused state rather than more certain. Most people get more certain. I really know you're being a dick. Okay, I'm certain of it. I'm certain I'm right. That self-righteousness you mentioned. Okay, well, how about if you get self-righteous, you go, I'm self-righteous, kind of suspicious of what I'm thinking and feeling at this moment. I better talk to somebody. My wife is great with this. I was pissed at this guy who didn't want me to talk at a conference because my list wasn't big enough. Okay, I just felt like sitting back and mess, fuck you, and but I wasn't going to do it. I was talking to Becky instead, and Becky said, "Look, the guy has his own deal. He made you an offer. You can send somebody a manuscript or something. And he was being helpful. Be nice to the guy." And I went, "Wow." I just went from wanting to go fuck you to going, wow, the guy's trying to be nice to me. That happened in like 10 seconds. And I was very struck after all these years and all this self-reflection that I could go bam, bam, like that. And I think this is something that's a useful thing on the integration of defenses line. It's not like you ever get to a place where it's all easy, but you get to a place where you have different reactions to your own reactions. That's why the witness helps. That's why contemplative stuff helps.
Yep.
But self-awareness isn't enough. To be dialed in, you have to have self-awareness that has some kind of organizing principles involved that guide you. And those organizing principles are one of the reasons I wrote Integral Mindfulness is, okay, now we've got mindfulness, now what? Well, integral understanding kind of guides us. Is destructive shadow happening right now? If it is, I need to dialysize it before I act on the world or I relate with you. Is there something in me that I'm avoiding, something beautiful or something ugly? If I can find it and have compassion for it, okay, that kind of makes me more in harmony. The more interesting that becomes, the farther you are on the integration of defenses line. A couple doing that together, their conflicts are almost unrecognizable as conflicts, because they're just regulated so effectively. It just looks like they're having a conversation. They're actually having arguments, but they're regulating constantly out of the defensive. The defensive states are rising. They get regulated unconsciously and consciously back into social engagement. Social engagement tends to produce more harmony, more complexity, more complexity will arise out of that. And humans are complex systems. Human relationships, complex systems. And, that's not complicated. Complicated is predictable. Complex isn't predictable.
Right.
You manage the processes, which there's a million of them, and then you wait for novelty to arise, trusting that if you manage the processes well enough, that the novelty, the greater complexity, will have more compassion, will have deeper consciousness, as it always does. So there it is. That's why we avoid self-awareness. This is how it happened developmentally, how it happens in relationships and individually. It's not just negative stuff, it's positive stuff. The defenses are designed to not encounter ourselves. That creates rigid spots that stop us from integrating into greater complexity in our consciousness. It never stops. We'll be having to be doing this kind of regulation, self-awareness the rest of our lives, as long as we're, conscious, self-aware beings. And so these are all processes to be managed. They're not problems to be solved, and we can get better at it. And that sense of self-knowledge continues. We never have complete self-knowledge. It's kind of a comforting thing for me.
Yeah. Like Ken says, you can never be fully educated.
Right.
You also can never be fully enlightened.
Yeah. And that's actually comfort. It used to piss me off, I gotta say.
Give me an omega point, damn it.
I wanted my omega point. I was talking to Patricia Albert about this, and she said, yeah, the whole non-dual thing is there's something not there about it. And I said, yeah, the thing that's not there, and that she has a lot of insight about, is that we always imagine when we get to a non-dual point of awareness, that it's kind of an individual getting to a non-dual point of awareness. But it's not an individual at that point. It's like all of us together all the time as one. It's not me seeing a burning bush and telling you about it. It's us in relationship seeing the burning bush together. That kind of intersubjectivity, that usness, kind of transcends our individual identities, and then we'll have shared experiences. It's not primarily us individually having those shared experiences. It's us as a unit having those experiences. That's what she does in the evolutionary collective a lot, and she has a lot of nuanced awareness of those kinds of states.
Right.
And those states are kind of post-defensive states. When you're there, you have such a level of mutuality that defenses rarely will arise. But these are highly structured situations.
Right. Well, that's kind of, as you're talking, and I'm kind of reflecting, it occurs to me that, like so many of our conversations are, and just like how, it's just sort of the nature of human psychology in general, but it's this constant effort to really reconcile sort of the oldest parts of ourselves with the newest, most newly emergent parts of ourselves. Yeah. I mean, you and I, we have conversations like these every month, and they're always fascinating, both for us and for the people who watch, largely because it's all taking place within this field of meta awareness that we all have access to. And that meta awareness brings with it a certain, curiosity, a certain kind of resilience, or even anti-fragility, kind of a hurts more, bothers you less sensibility.
Exactly. Anti-fragile is a good way of understanding it.
Which I think gives us sort of, everything we need, the tools that we need to begin to do this work, and to really start taking a look at some of these adaptive intelligences that we still have in us, that were really, calibrated, even fine-tuned, for optimal mental health a million years ago, back when we were on the savannah. Right. And now we're still carrying these defenses with us, these reactions with us, every step of the way, until now we have, again, access to this kind of meta aware level of consciousness that allows us to start bringing the entirety of our being online, just to have these conversations. Because as you're talking, I mean, I'm feeling some of those, really deep, like I keep kind of patting my belly, because that's where it feels like a lot of them kind of come from. They're welling up from somewhere really, really deep down, maybe even a pre-verbal level that's really hard to get to sort of rationally.
It's absolutely a pre-verbal level.
And yet I can feel it emerging. I can feel that energy coming forth as we're talking within this container of meta awareness. But there's all that connective tissue in between. Like we started talking about life stories, and I could see, as we're talking of, every chapter of my life story that I've sort of inherited for myself at each stage of my development. And there's little aspects of those stages that are still part of my life story. And in fact, my work over the last really 2 years of doing these shows with folks like you and Ken and others has been confronting a lot of those really negative, kind of sour aspects of my own life story that were that were basically provoking defensive states all the time, and anxieties and all that. And I realized I had to actually fundamentally start changing that script before I could start feeling a little bit more comfortable showing up on camera with people as, brilliant and warm as yourself.
Well, that's you doing trauma work. That when you go, you notice you didn't forget about all the stuff you're talking about, but you feel differently about it. How did you do that? I mean, that's a physiological shift in your consciousness around that stuff. And so that trauma work always involves some kind of accessing the experience physiologically, which opens up the whole memory, the body memory, the cognitive memory, so on, and then reconsolidating it from a higher point of view, a higher level of awareness, a higher level of moral awareness, higher level of interpersonal awareness. And as you reconsolidate it, what happens? The negative charge goes down, it gets less rigid, and it becomes more integrated, more linked to all the different parts of your consciousness. And you see it as a part of a much larger and more important whole, where everybody has a function.
Right.
The selfish me has a function, the violent me has a function, the loving me has a function, the naive me has a function. All of them fit into that community. My self-aware consciousness is the choir director, and my job is to always be directing the choir to sing in harmony. And then here, just like a choir director hears when there's a sour note, and helping, and not just, the choir director does not pull out a pistol and shoot somebody who's singing out of key. Okay, it's like, oh, you're out of key, bam. Right. Okay, now we're going to be back in harmony. Okay, that's not what he does or she does. You go, oh, you're out of harmony. Let me help you get in harmony with the rest of us. Oh yeah, that sounds great. Okay, no, actually, you need to do a solo now. Okay, you're in an alley, Mr. Violent Self. You guys are going to do a solo with this guy that's trying to mess with you. Go fuck him up, and we'll all just kind of help you out. Okay, great. Now, now that the trauma healing part of me now has to heal you from the trauma of having to fuck that guy up. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Now we're back in harmony. The more that we feel a sense of positive responsibility to be a good choir director, the more the autobiographical narrative continues to play. And, out of that is the shift from self-authoring mind to self-transforming mind, to use Kagan's terms. You don't really know what's going to arise out of that because complex systems aren't predictable, but some good will. You keep on keeping everybody in harmony and some cool thing will come out of it.
Well, that's kind of the thing about why defensive states can be so comfortable, right? I mean, once you get to these sort of levels of altitude and of development, I mean, shit starts getting kind of, it's hard to know when there's solid ground underneath your feet. It's a lot easier to kind of know your place because someone tells you where your place is, right? Rather than having to ad hoc figure all of this out sort of for yourself. And that creates its own anxieties and insecurities and defenses. And I think that's kind of the important thing here is that, these defensive states, they're natural. I mean, we get defensive for a reason.
Have them. If you don't have them, you're a psychopath. We have to have the capacity for shame. That's why my book, The Gift of Shame, that was not an ironic title.
Right.
It's a gift. It's what keeps us from being psychopaths.
Right.
We're being flaming narcissists. We're ashamed if we act in a way that's not pro-social. We should be ashamed. Now, we don't want to get lost in it. We want to make adjustments so then we can feel virtuous again. That's what we do if we're orchestrating the choir appropriately.
Right. Yeah, totally fascinating. And it also seems to me, Keith, as you're talking, that when you're talking about these sort of organizing principles that allow us to sort of add a new chapter onto our personal autobiographical narrative, and make it that much more coherent. It seems like oftentimes there's a competition of different possible sort of, points of organization where
there's conflict.
Like for me, and just go back to my process in doing the show, what helped me was getting to the point where I realized what I need to hold myself accountable to was not sort of my own fears and anxieties of being found out or all the imposter stuff that came along with it. But it's like, okay, I'm fortunate enough to be sitting in a seat that for whatever reason creates a lot of value and a lot of meaning for people out there. I need to live up to that.
That's
Right.
right.
So this became something that was like outside of myself, a little bit bigger. The seat I'm sitting in felt a little large for me. Right. So I'm like, okay, I need to grow into this. This needs to become sort of my new organizing principle. And once that sort of clicked, a lot of other things began to click into place where it's like, I used to have this anxiety that like, okay, I don't want to be held up as, you know, some integral role model because Jesus, I feel just as broken as anyone else. And I have just as much work to do. And, you know, and I'm struggling as much as anyone else. I don't want anyone to put me on a pedestal just because I'm showing up on camera. And as soon as I sort of made that shifted as well. And it started, you know, well, okay, this is actually about the process and the fact that I'm comfortable talking about whatever brokenness that I feel. Well, that can be valuable to people too. All right.
Well,
Like we can sort of, I can grow into this, and that growing into this can be part of this seat that I'm trying to sit in itself.
well, no offense, but you are an integral role model. You're much more
Fuck.
you're much more authoritative and confident and articulate now than when I first met you, and you were pretty articulate when I first met you. So these things have grown your unconscious to the point that you have a different level of discourse in these kinds of dialogues than when you and I first talked, at least as far as I can see about you, which is how we can tell vertical development. We have different reactions. We have different capacities in different situations and a different understanding. You know, the understanding is that there's all these processes that we're always going to be managing, and that different things are going to arise periodically, problems, destructive shadow, trauma that we need to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was in Brazil, I was homesick the first 3 or 4 days, and I was kind of resisting being there when I was teaching, and interestingly, I broke my finger in doing a therapy thing the 4th day I was there.
That's some intense therapy.
It was intense.
High contact therapy.
I was working with this woman in front of 45 different people, and she was dealing with some asshole guy. You know, it's a patriarchy, you know, in Brazil. There's a lot of guys being shitty to women historically. Anyway, you know, like I pull up a pillow. She wanted to kick him. And I said, go ahead and kick him, you know, but not knowing that she studied Muay Thai for 4 years. So she didn't kick the pillow. She kicked my hand and broke my finger.
Oh, man.
I had to go down out of the mountains of Brazil to a hospital and get a cast put on that night. Anyway, I was feeling kind of homesick. And so they do constellations there. So, you know, I was with some of the people on the team and I said, well, let's do a constellation. So we did constellation. It's an interesting form of treatment. We'll talk about it sometime, maybe do an episode on it. Mm. And in that, there was a person who was representing Keith's homesickness. And I went, okay, well, let's work on it. I mean, I kind of tolerated it most of my life. Let's go deeper into that. Where is that? Where does that keeps happening up? And it led into a trauma history, which led into some work, which led into a feeling of liberation from that particular thing. I was thinking, God, after all these years, all this therapy, all this self-awareness, here's a major thing that I've kind of ignored until this moment. I had to kind of force myself to go teach in a place where I was kind of scared of doing it. And then take this on in a way that I hadn't taken it on before with the help of some other people doing this constellation. I thought, wow. And it made me think, there's a lot of this in the future. I mean, I expect to have stuff like that happen until I die. And right. Again, that used to bother me that stuff would keep coming up. Now I'm kind of excited about it. I mean, I like the idea of the whole integral idea of a lifetime of development of growth, and you're never there. You're always just having more capacities.
That's right. It's not a destination. It's not a noun. It's a verb.
And you know, there's an irony and a paradox in that on every developmental line, the more you ascend, the more you have vertical development. One of the things that characterizes vertical development on any line, if you think about it, is you have more options. Mm-hmm. You have more choices. You're not rigid. Like Sheldrake said that evolution is the combination of creativity and habits. Okay, so you're less driven by habits, you have more access to creativity. So you have more options the more you go on any line. But paradoxically, you have fewer choices, because the higher you are on a line, the more you have to make the right choice because it's more visible to you. And so having more options and fewer choices is a paradox. And yet there it is.
Right.
You go to the second tier, you have an infinity of options, really, but you have way fewer choices because it's much clearer to you what serves the highest good, what's more beautiful, good, and true. And that's true in a relationship. You have many more choices, many more options, but you have fewer choices because I'm going to make the choice that serves love for us. I'm not going to make the choice that serves violence. And this whole thing about the integration of defenses line and understanding that defenses are there for me to avoid myself, for me to avoid finding those places and liberating them into the choir. Understanding that then directs me into that process. This is one of the reasons why Gestalt was so popular in the 70s. Fritz Perls said Gestalt only does two things. It makes the implicit explicit and it points out the obvious. Okay. Now, he couldn't distinguish between attachment problems and relationship problems and traumatic programming and shadow and how they all fit together and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't the way that he was wired. But as a practical technology of change, it was very effective at the time because basically it was addressing this thing. Okay, there's a defense, go inward and find it and do something with it. Integrate.
Yeah.
So there we are. Now, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I want to open this up. If you guys have questions, let me give the spiel. So if you are watching this in Zoom right now, two ways you can engage. You can either submit a Q&A question, which we'll read on the air, or you can press the raise my hand button. That'll let us know you want us to turn on your camera, which we'll do. We'll have some back and forth. If you're watching this right now on YouTube or on integrallife.com/live, you need to be in the Zoom app to actually ask a question face-to-face. However, I do have YouTube open and Integral Live open. So if you write down a question, I'll be happy to read it for Keith. So while we wait to see if anyone has anything to say, I just want to mention, Keith, I'm going to be doing soon a talk with Ken about shadow. And I want to have one of those like really big, like 4-hour discussions with him to really, really get at the bottom of this. And I know you and Jeff recently did a talk about collective shadow, which is I haven't heard it yet, but it's something I want to jump into, and I'll point everyone to the Daily Evolver website to check that out. But at some point, Keith, I think it would be really useful for us to kind of come back to this topic that we're discussing today about the relationship that exists between this sort of spectrum of defensive states and the spectrum of shadow, because it seems like some of these defensive states can come out of shadow and can also prohibit you from actually getting sort of a clear understanding of shadow. It can keep you from your shadow.
I think that's right. Now, Ken and I have slightly different understandings of shadow.
Yep.
Mine's based more on interpersonal neurobiological research. Ken's based more on the Jungian concepts. There's golden shadow, there's stuff that we've repressed, there's stuff that we've suppressed, that kind of stuff, which is a useful way of looking at people's consciousness relating to the different acceptable and non-acceptable parts of themselves. To me, shadow is everything that we're not conscious of, the whole entire adaptive unconscious that is constantly sending us up material to guide us. And so as we get inputs from the world, our adaptive unconscious picks 7 plus or minus 2 things to focus on and gives us a story and an impulse and an emotion to guide us, and working memories sometimes, in memories to guide us appropriately. When we're socially engaged, generally that's positive. That's constructive shadow. It's designed to get things done, to, have a good time, to enjoy each other, to love each other, to be in the flow of life. That's, if I'm driving, my constructive shadow is having me drive safely. I've cultivated safe habits of driving and so on. But if we feel threatened or if we have bad habits, we'll have destructive material that will come up. and we're only aware of that stuff consciously, maybe 400 milliseconds to a second after it comes up. And, we're always walking around in this 8-second sausage of time that our nervous system experiences as the present moment, always a little bit behind. And our unconscious is giving us this material, constructive, destructive shadow, that we can be aware of or not be aware of, depending upon, how robust our self-aware witness is. And developmentally, if we're looking particularly at vertical development, it is marked by that shadow self, that adaptive unconscious, becoming more coherent, becoming more wise, essentially, and more loving. And so it will do information processing for us. And if somebody acts in an irritating fashion, we're less likely to honk the horn and more likely to go, I bet that person's having a bad day. We don't experience that as a choice. It's our unconscious learns how to make that choice for us, which frees us up to go further. And this is kind of how you mark progress on almost every psychosocial or psychotherapeutic system. People begin to change their habitual reactions. What's that? That's your shadow growing and changing. Now, how that manifests in every worldview, well, Ken is wonderful about discussing that, and I'm sure he'll talk about it during those 4 hours. Why in every worldview, there's different things that are acceptable and unacceptable. But remember, the whole thing about acceptable and unacceptable, safe and not safe, moral and not moral, all that stuff was originally learned when our brains were mature and were concrete operational at best. These are black, white, absolutistic, primitive systems that get included and transcended in more sophisticated systems. But when we're threatened, that compromises the more sophisticated systems. We go to the more primitive ones. And so development, part of moving through the world, is recognizing that and reaching for our cutting edge, our forward edge moral systems, and continuing to reinforce them in the morphic fields that they create, so that more and more and more they subsume those primitive systems and less those primitive systems intrude. And that's basically developing a relationship with our adaptive unconscious, with our shadow self, and taking a stand for growth and for development and transformation. And you do that from conforming mind first, to begin to learn how to be in societies, what are the rules, into self-authoring mind, into, okay, now I have goals that I can manifest while I am functioning collaboratively in society, to self-transforming mind, where I maintain the processes and allow novelty to come out as me as an instrument of the infinite. It's just the way that it works.
I just got to say, you just gave me my first 2 album titles for the prog rock band that I'm going to start. The first one, my first album is going to be called The 8-Second Sausage of Time. and my second one's going to be whatever beautiful piece of poetry you just said. I'm going to bring George Larson on.
Sure.
The 8-Second Sausage of Time. Hey, George.
Can't hear him.
Nope, he's oh, now you're unmuted.
George.
Are you there, George?
I'm trying.
Oh,
there you are.
We got it. Okay.
Yeah, we don't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah. Camera's in the bag. I should have gotten it out. But
No problem.
No problem, George.
So earlier, toward the beginning, you made a reference to indulging sadistic tendencies for relief. We all know some asshole who is an asshole in the name, they say, of being honest, right? Like,
that's right. That's exactly right.
So if what's really going on there is there's a sense of relief, I'm wondering, relief from what?
It feels good to attack someone that you're angry at. Anger is a real tricky emotion that way. It's designed to both separate us psychologically, but also protect us. And, in the original tribes, the way that it worked, and the way it still works in primate tribes, is that it's called epididactic display. There'll be display, hostile display, and one person will submit and one person will dominate. And the person who dominates feels good. It feels good to be a bully. Bullies tend to have pretty high self-esteem. If you take kids under 10 and you watch them in conflict without an adult around, 8 times out of 10, 8 times out of 9, what will happen is one kid will dominate the other, or one kid will take off. And so there's a primitive desire to be the alpha. And you establish that by bullying another person, and it feels good to have that. Now, if you're green, you feel guilty about it afterwards, and then either deny it or pretend that you didn't do it, or come up with some version of Jeff and I were talking about this yesterday. Pathologizing the super conservative people on wanting to punish them and stuff. So that's why it feels good. There's a sense of release. Now, that's dangerous because violence is the worst addiction. Once you start enjoying hurting other people, like that bully I talked about with his family, you start normalizing it, and you create a habitual field of that becomes an attractor state. Under stress, I look for some opportunity to bully somebody. And that really causes an enormous amount of damage. And so the more you practice that, the more you wire that in. There's probably circuits that are hardwired to send you there, and there's probably fields of attractor states that draw you there until you create a new attractor state, until you create new circuits where you go, I have the instinct to bully, but I'm not going to go there. I'm going to do something else. And we see this a lot with modern parenting. Modern parents are very reluctant to bully their children. Nobody was reluctant to bully children when I was a kid. 1954, 55, you do stuff that kids do today. And what would happen to me is I would get hit or beaten. Certainly I would be humiliated and disapproved of majorly and punished. Okay. And so I was afraid of adults hurting me. And so they terrorized me into conformity. Now, unfortunately what this did is it really, really drove the cultural revolution in the 60s. Everybody got to be teenagers or young adults. So they said, fuck you guys who've been terrorizing me. We're going to terrorize you.
So we may have overcompensated.
Yeah, we overcompensated. Overcompensated into, boomeritis. So anyway, so that's why. And so it's a human tendency, it's human capacity, and you need it once in a while. I studied martial arts forever, and you don't study martial arts to have fair fights with people. I always had complete distress with people going, there's some kind of rule in combat. There are no rules. If I was in combat and had a chance to bite somebody's throat out, I would bite their throat out. Okay. Why? Because I'm not learning this stuff to have a fair fight. I'm learning this stuff so if somebody fucks with me, I will bully them. And the idea that I can do that is very comforting to me. Certainly it was in the 50s and 60s when there's a lot of dangerous people around and violence was a lot more common. Okay, well, I didn't want to be scared all the time. So I thought, okay, we'll develop these capacities. Now I happen to have a moral center, so I've never really hit anybody in anger that I can think of. But, it's there if I need it. You know why? Because I knew that in human social environments, other people are going to have instincts to bully me, and I don't want to be the victim. Now, what's much better when somebody does that is to turn them into your ally. Okay, and that's using, social, that's why the integral people are always, are called by Claire Graves, universal donors, and why in conflict, people go, that integral person wasn't so bad. Why? Because we're looking at doing jujitsu to a certain extent, doing Aikido with those kinds of energies into collaboration and social engagement. And we do it because we're regulating ourselves and we're keeping a sense of empathic attunement to whoever is getting distressed, and which helps calm people down. And, that's a lot of responsibility, but that's the thing. Deeper consciousness comes with more responsibility. So I hope that answered your question a little bit, George.
It did. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for joining us, George.
Yeah.
Yeah, Keith, it seems like that's really one of the valuable qualities of I really don't like using the phrase second tier. I don't know why. I've got antibodies around second tier for some reason, but it genuinely is, I think,
the whole level thing. We still have antibodies to, and look, there's just second tier moments.
Yeah, that's well said.
We all have, we really go through all the value memes. I think most of us go through all of them every day. I think most people from Amber onward, really.
Yeah.
The more you develop, the more moments you spend with
Right.
all the
Yeah,
configuration.
that's well said. And one of the capacities it gives you is the ability to really inhabit any of these previous rungs as needed, because sometimes the red response is the right response. I mean, I remember I was talking on Facebook
Right.
a week or two ago about when we're just talking about, when is red leadership appropriate? Because a lot of times it is. I mean, let's face it, most small businesses in America are run according to red leadership, right? It's a small family business. There's one person on top. They're telling everyone what to do. Red can be in a very appropriate, contextually appropriate leadership style. I was talking to one guy who, on the one hand, loves all of these integral conversations and has a practice to cultivate their own, inner compassion and empathy and all these things. And their day job is a bouncer in a bar.
Yeah, right.
All right.
The
So
good
it's like
bouncers are
you're
very
living this territory.
good bouncers are very collaborative. The second tier is the first, all the first tier memes.
That's right.
But it has choices. Remember, you have more options and fewer choices.
Yep.
You have options to have a healthy expression of all the first tier memes, and you have the options to take a stand against the unhealthy expression.
Right.
And if you talk to bouncers tend to look scary, but act in a very gentle and collaborative fashion. But they can turn up their emotional intensity a little bit.
Yep.
They're good at like easing people out of these situations.
Yep. And if those people can't be eased, then they're ready to be physical if they need to.
Yeah, and they're generally confident enough that they don't have to hurt people.
Yep.
Last time I saw a couple of bouncers, ease somebody out of a dance bar. There was a reggae dance bar in San Luis Obispo, and I was out there, rocking out and having a good time. And some guy started, and the bouncers eased the guy out. They were containing him the way that like a grown-up would contain their 3-year-old or 4-year-old. It was really interesting. So their energy was soothing but firm. And
Right.
and there was resistance is futile. So they had that energy about them.
And there's
And
such
so
just
red. That actually is an integral response.
Yeah.
Because amber and orange, particularly 3.5 orange rather than 4 orange, levels, they need external constraint. Red needs external constraint. They won't cooperate unless you provide external constraint first. And so providing external constraint is the integral response to those value memes most of the time. And then once that happens, then you have cooperation.
Yeah. It's such an important point because from green, red looks like shadow, right?
Yeah.
Just red in all forms is shadow. That's what it looks like from green. Several months ago, Ken and I did a really fascinating tour through the stages of growing up using film clips as an example for each stage. And it was really cool. I definitely encourage people to check it out. It's fun to talk to Ken about movies. He's such a film buff. But anyway, one of my self-imposed challenges when I was doing that series was because I was trying to come up with like 3 to 4 clips for each stage that really represents the basic kind of tone and leadership styles, et cetera, associated. And my challenge was I'm going to go through and I'm going to find an example of healthy red. That's really hard to find in film and entertainment. It's really hard to find healthy red examples. It's almost, red is the bad guy in every movie, right? And or it's just sort of presented in a neutral way, sort of the classic film clip being the Conan the Barbarian, hear the lamentations of their women. Well, it's not really positive, or that was what it was.
Said that.
Right?
Genghis Khan said, "No, I like nothing better than to defeat the men and hear the lamentations of the women." Genghis Khan was really kind of a mofo guy. Anyway, so what clips did you come up with for healthy red?
Well, the clip I actually came up with was from the most recent Mad Max movie, Fury Road. And it was a clip of Furiosa in the desert with like the 3 beautiful half-naked model women.
I remember that.
And she's basically like, Max just stole the truck and drove off with it. And Charlize Theron, Furiosa, turns around to the women and was like, "Do you want to live? Follow me." And it's like just this matter, like this is the only way. It's my way.
For death.
There's not even a highway. I mean, it's my way or death, right? And that was like that. You could feel it, and you can feel something kind of stiffen in your spine. And you're like, yeah, I respond to, to that leadership. And it was a great example of healthy red in the moment, right?
The more dangerous the environment, the more you need a healthy red leader.
Yeah.
Families become more authoritarian when there's physical danger threatening them. One woman I worked with, her family was hiding from the Nazis, and she was 3, and they, she could have choked to death. They just wouldn't let her make a sound because the Nazis were outside. Yeah. They were hiding from them. So the more you need red in those kinds of environments. Genghis Khan's the greatest, the Lamentations of the Women. And Genghis Khan is an example of healthy red in that after he did his empire, they said that a virgin could travel by herself with 2 chests of gold from one end of the Mongol Empire to the other and not be messed with, because the Mongols were so scary when people that broke their laws. It was like, you break my law, we'll kill you.
Right.
So, you don't want to jaywalk in a society like that.
Yeah.
You don't want to go over the speed limit. Why? The penalty is death.
Right.
So everything until Kublai Khan died, for several generations, it was one of the most peaceful empires that had ever existed on the face of the earth. Now, of course, it all fell to pieces. It needed amber to be more stable.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that I think that we forget, largely probably because of the entertainment that we receive. But red is capable of very, very deep love, very deep empathy, very, very deep compassion. It's just limited in terms of, how far you extend that love and empathy. And, red is, again, it's the appropriate response when you are protecting who you love.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Keith, this has been amazing, as always.
Another great talk. Thanks,
yeah, man.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. It's just really nice to have this conversation. Thanks for asking questions and so on.
Yeah, totally. I love it when these guys ask questions. Can we do a couple plugs? Yeah,
let's do plugs. So I'll go first.
You go first.
So on my website, there's a class now called 100 Reasons Not to Have a Secret Affair. And I encourage you to check it out. Also, if you haven't joined up on my website, go join my website. And every week for the next 7 weeks, you're going to get a video of something that I found super cool. I made a list of things that I thought were super cool things and did little videos with some other material associated with them. And if you sign up for my website, you'll get one of those. And you also get a free copy of my book, The Attuned Family. So sign up for my website, check out my 100 Reasons class. Check out my book, Loving Completely, and my book, Shadow Light, particularly since Ken's going to be talking about shadow. Read Shadow Light and then listen to Ken talk about shadow with Corey. I think that would be a couple of good perspectives there.
Heck yeah. That's a good plug.
That's a good
plug. Why don't you let people know what the URL of your site is?
drkeithwitt.com.
Well, that's easy to remember.
drkeithwitt.com. Check it out. There's a lot of stuff there. There's my Shrinking Pundit, things with Jeff. There's a lot of talks that I've done with other people. There's my Therapist in the Wild web series that I did for a while. There's about 40 of them, where I do rants about various things I like to rant about. Go and check it out. And anything that you use, my blessing, I hope it's useful.
It's a fun playground. Now, to keep in mind, everyone, that Keith saves his best stuff for Integral Life. So
there you go.
All right, my turn. So I have been making these lately, and I want to make them for you, people who are watching us right now. Here are these 4-quadrant carvings.
Isn't that beautiful? I mean, look at it. It's just beautiful.
Thank you, Keith. I worked very hard on these. So this is, for example, made from Purple Heart, which is just a beautiful wood. I painted the details gold. I don't know if you're getting kind of the shimmery effect there. But I am making these for by commission for people. Custom orders for anyone who wants one. They are generally between, I don't know, $300 and $500 each. I'm making like $5 an hour actually making them. I just love woodworking, and I love making things for people to put in their home, especially tremendously meaningful things like the 4 quadrants. Yeah. My goal here was to try to take, Ken's chart that has, again, created so much meaning for so many of us over the years and really do something beautiful with it. And that's what I came up with.
Yeah, hold it up again, Corey. look at that, the center, that's the Big Bang, everybody. That is the Big Bang, and it's going off in all the different directions from the Big Bang past the present moment into the future. I mean, that's just super cool. So, I encourage people to get one of those.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, if you guys are interested, just drop me an email. Corey, Corey at integrallife.com. I would love to work with you and get you your own custom piece. I also just launched a Facebook page for my woodcrafts. I'm calling it Vision Logics Woodworks. So check it out. Give it a like. I think I told everyone, if you like my Facebook page and you order something from me in the next 2 weeks, I'll give you $25 off.
There you go. It's another example of how novelty arises out of complexity in unexpected ways. It's emergence. Who could have ever predicted you would be doing woodworking with the 4 quadrants?
Yeah, certainly not me.
It just emerged.
Yeah.
That's evolution. That's the creative advance in the novelty right there.
So yeah, let me know if you guys are interested. Keith, I'm gonna make one for you, and I'm gonna send it to you for free, buddy.
Oh, that is so nice. I'll put it in my office.
Nice.
Which would be great. I get to explain integral. Oh, Corey.
Nice.
I am touched and kind of speechless, which is unusual for me.
We'll talk about what your favorite woods are.
Oh, whatever you decide is my favorite wood.
Cool, man. I'll get something nice for you.
Oh.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us. Keith, thank you as always, man. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure is mine too. I love talking with you, Corey, and I love everybody coming in and participating.
All righty.
Everybody.
Yeah, much love to everybody, and we will see you next month. All right. Bye, guys.